here today. I mean, the banner says it. We're here because we care about democracy.
Far too many Canadians are not being represented in Parliament by the people that they voted for.
We all assume that because we vote, we have elections, but we don't really.
Sometimes people get confused.
First past the post is an unrepresentative system, and therefore it can't be called truly democratic.
We do have a lot of current examples in Ottawa of our democracy under threat, and that also concerns me.
With first past the post, it's not an election. It's another way of just transferring power.
First past the post system is really a medieval invention.
Our system is based on this idea that these representatives represent everyone in a district, and that's absolutely not true.
Democracy is in decline. We see voter turnout declining. We see apathy increasing. We see all those barometers of the health of our democracy going down.
We don't like the current voting system. It has to change.
Proportional representation has to occur immediately.
We want to make sure that this 2015 election is the last unfair election in this country.
How do you know that will happen? How do you know anything that I say might actually happen? Politicians have this reputation of saying one thing and doing another.
I thought I would escape without having to answer questions.
There seems to be a disconnect between the people that are being represented and those who make the political decisions on our behalf.
There is another way to look at this issue, and it's one of equality.
Democracy is not totally dead.
We could do much better than what we have now.
Today we're holding a forum with a couple of speakers to discuss proportional representation, electoral reform, and sort of the state of our democracy. Currently we have an electoral system. It's called first past the post, or a single member plurality. That means there's one representative in each riding across the country. So all people cast ballots in that riding, and the person with the most votes, not necessarily a majority, gets that seat. As that sort of perpetuates across the country, you get governments that have majority mandates that can get that power with only about 39% of the vote, which means that they get majority governments with a minority of the vote. We seek to see an electoral reform in which we would have a proportional representation voting system, whereby if you get around 39% of the vote, you would receive close to approximately 39% of the seats or the power. So proportional representation basically tries to equate the amount of the vote with the amount of seats and the amount of power in our houses of government.
All right, well, first of all, thank you very much for coming out. This is a fabulous turnout for a voting reform event. I'm a citizen here in Courtenay. I have had a strong interest in voting reform for a long time, the better part of 15 years now. And that includes time that I lived in Germany and in Ireland, and I've had a chance to see a number of other voting systems basically in practice. And having spent some time there, it's certainly clear to me that we could do much better than what we have now. And to that end, certainly my hope is that over time, as a society, we'll eventually get over this and decide to take lessons from people around other parts of the world that show that perhaps it's time to upgrade our voting system and the way that we're represented by our politicians. Fair Vote Canada is a grassroots organization. It has no sort of corporate sponsorship to speak of, and it's a nonprofit. So it's you're not talking about a bunch of people that are out to make a bunch of money or to return anything to shareholders. And currently, the biggest initiative underway at Fair Vote Canada, certainly at the national level, is to put voting reform back onto the political radar at the federal level. Fair Vote Canada is dedicated to promoting proportional representation here in Canada. And proportional representation, well, our speakers will get into what proportional representation means. Wendy and Craig both were kind of superstars of the speaking circuit and promoting electoral reform, and really good at making people understand what this is all about.
So how did I get into this? Well, I was really unhappy with the voting system, or I was unhappy with the outcomes of elections. And I didn't really know what the problem was. Now, the thing about our current system is that it defines us. It defines our interests by where we live. It is assumed that we share our values and interests with our physical neighbors. Now, this may have worked back in the 1800s when a small group of landowners within riding distance on their horses could get together and decide who to send off to the faraway legislature to represent their similar interests. It doesn't work anymore. It hasn't changed to recognize the different interests different groups of people have. And of course, with the internet and all these things that are also changing in our technology world, many communities of interest are now spatially diffuse. And they are unable to get reasonable representation. And the Green Party is, of course, a perfect example of a party that represents a group of people around the country and the province who have similar interests and can't get properly represented. Given that on average an MLA only receives half the votes in a riding, a majority of MLAs, even if all of them were, if we're talking about all of them, they only really represent about half the people who voted, much less the people who didn't vote. Okay, so why change? Using our voting system to reflect the will of the electorate is like using a funhouse mirror to reflect your image. I don't know what this person really looks like, but I think a lot of times when we look at the results from an election, we go, huh? This isn't how we voted. A lot of times political commentators will go on about the number of seats a party gets as if that's the support they have from the population, when in fact it's quite different from, most of the time, it's quite different from the proportion. Majority government should represent a majority of its citizens. That's what we think, but we've just talked about how in fact they don't. Almost never do they, the party that's forming the majority government party, more majority government, has gotten more than half the vote. So now what are the alternatives to our first past the post? Well, proportional voting systems provide a much better match between how people vote and the final outcome, and there are three main families. The first one is PR list. And this is where you vote for parties with candidate lists. So you go and you vote for before the election, the parties publish a list of candidates in order. And if they get 5 seats, the top 5 people on their party list gets in, etc. And most people don't think that people in Canada would be interested in that because we're so committed to local representation. So the second choice is MMP, mixed member proportional. This is a mixture of our current voting system with a PR list. And then there's STV, which is what the Citizens Assembly recommended. It's a variety of PR lists where voters rank the candidates on the party list. So in other words, on the party lists and can cross party lines when doing so. So it gives us a lot of voter choice. I think it's one of the big reasons we chose STV was the voter choice. We could vote by candidates, we could vote by party, we could choose to vote only for women candidates, we could choose to vote for only environmentally strong candidates. Whatever issue was important to us, we could choose to vote for a bunch of candidates that would represent those interests. A lot of people, like I've been involved now in voting systems for a long time, and I get involved with people who get really argument about little details, this detail versus that detail, and sometimes you get so lost in the details you can't see the bigger picture. But I think what we've come to learn is that we have to have lots of people telling our politicians we don't like the current voting system, it has to change. To change, we need to convince more and more people that there needs to be change, and then it'll become harder for politicians to ignore it. If there's a lot of people saying we want change, then they'll have to do something about it.
Thank you, Wendy. We managed to chew through about 1% of what Wendy knows about things. Our next presenter, he's very knowledgeable, and he's been a very powerful activist within the voting reform movement.
I was randomly selected to be a member of the Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform 10 years ago. Unfortunately, this has become a lifestyle rather than a one-year adventure. This is so obviously insane what has happening in our democracy and has been happening for a very long time that it's incredible. Voting in Canada is you vote and then you see if you won or not. You know, did I win the election? Did I get an MP or an MLA? But that's not the choice that we wanted. We want to be able to choose our MLA and get that MLA, get that person to be our representative. And that's not what was happening, of course. And Wendy mentioned that federally, provincially, about 50% of voters don't get the representative that they voted for. So pick an issue. Development of the oil sands, pro or con, healthcare spending, taxation, different candidates, different parties have different perspectives. And when they vote in the legislature, in Parliament, they vote one way or the other. They're going to support one prime minister or another. MLAs will say, or MPs will say they represent everybody, but they can't possibly do that. We know that's ridiculous. So our system is based on this idea that these representatives represent everyone in a district, and that's absolutely not true. 50% of voters don't have an MLA or MP that they voted for, on average. So they are not represented. They don't have local representation. A good way to improve that local representation would be to give them a rep. A good way to improve the representation of cities and towns and districts would be to make sure that there's just not one point of view representing that district's point of view in the legislature or parliament, but have multiple points of view. So having a multiple member district, that will allow every area to be represented for the different interests, whether it's healthcare or resource development or social services or education, whatever it is. Every viewpoint needs to be in the conversation, and it needs to be in the conversation for the term of office, not just the term of the election. So 3 weeks of discussing or 5 weeks of discussing, the various topics, who cares? You go and vote and that's it. You want that discussion to be happening for the 4 years while the people are in office, and arguing in your community, in the newspaper, and on the radio, and on television, and in public meetings. But we don't get that. The person's there, they get elected, and then they leave. Come back to tell us what the party position is, right? Instead of the other way around. Voters said they don't like that. They want to know, they want to tell their MPs, MLAs, what to do, rather than the other way. When you're talking about voting about spending, about who gets what in this country, who pays for what, who gets healthcare, who doesn't get healthcare, education, whatever it is, whatever the issue, some districts or some individuals have a lot more say than other individuals. Shouldn't every MP and MLA represent about the same number of voters in the legislature? You would think that they got one vote. Shouldn't they represent about the same number of people? That's the problem of first past the post. It doesn't guarantee that the most popular ideas are put into effect. It almost guarantees that you have no idea if the most popular ideas are put into effect. So it's another crazy thing. So I would like to present to you an alternative way of looking at this issue. Because we've been doing this, looking at it from the standpoint of proportionality, and that's the main thing that people have been looking at, and that's absolutely critical. We need laws and policies in Canada that reflect the majority of opinion of voters, and now we don't have that. Parties can have 40% of the votes and 100% of the power, and that's problematic. We all know that, and that's why we're here. There is another way to look at this issue, and it's one of equality, and it's equality between voters. In order to have equality, you get proportionality as a natural result from that. Proportionality is the votes in the House and legislature are going to be supported by a majority of the population. So if our laws are supported by 50% or more of the population, that's a good idea, instead of 40% or 35% or whatever we have now. We spent a year trying to figure out which electoral system would be best in British Columbia. We had a very interesting way of determining this. We built the best MMP system we could, that we thought would solve the problems for BC the best, and would be the most popular and the most saleable in the province, and we built the best STV system we could. Because there are a lot of details in how you build the systems, and they affect things. When we voted about which system to support on the Assembly, 80% of Assembly members chose STV, 20% chose MMP. So STV had a pretty good consensus. And then we voted between STV and first past the post, and there was a 95% support of members for STV over first past the post.
We're going to give political parties a chance to let everybody know what their parties are planning to do about this issue.
I'm Catherine Bell. The NDP does have a clear policy on electoral reform, and we believe that far too many Canadians are not being represented in Parliament by the people that they voted for. 60% of Canadians did not vote for Stephen Harper's Conservatives, yet they enjoy a majority government, a majority of the seats in the House. So we need a proportional representation voting system to better reflect the political preferences of Canadians. A party receiving 40% of the vote should receive 40% of the seats. The NDP has a very strong chance of forming, first time ever, a government in this country. And so if elected, we would introduce a system of proportional representation within our first term in office, making sure that 2015 is the last unfair election in this country. So under the system that we are looking at is a mixed member proportional system favored by the NDP, which combines proportional representation of parties in Parliament with the direct election of an MP in each constituency. And versions of the MMP, as we heard from Wendy and from, Craig, too many names today for me, have seen successful governments in New Zealand, Scotland, and as well as in Germany. And where in the MMP system, the two principles that interact are direct election of the MP and a representation of the parties in the legislature in proportion to the percentage of the popular vote that they receive. Just keep in mind, our determination to introduce this legislation in our first term in office is not negotiable, because we want to make sure that this 2015 election is the last unfair election in this country. So get involved, get out and support the candidates of your choice, and let's change the direction of this country. Thank you.
My name is Peter Swarzoff, and although it surprises me to admit it, I am in fact a politician. So we don't have a platform. We have a party policy. So I can't tell you that this will be a core thing that the leader will present to you during the next election, but I can tell you that this is the party speaking with Justin Trudeau in the room. Immediately after the next election, an all-party process will be instituted, which involves expert assistance, citizens' participation, there you go, your work won't be lost, to report to Parliament within 12 months with recommendations for electoral forms, including, without limitation, a preferential ballot and or a form of proportional representation to represent Canada more fairly and to serve Canadians better. That's the resolution. So I think what you saw from that is that, assuming you know this is going to go ahead in some form, we just don't know what form it will be in, and there's a process and there's a threshold that would have to be met, and I know that that's a sore point because some people think it should be 50%, some people think it should be more. It's not going to be instant. We're not saying it's in the first year. It's a process. I understand all of that. But there it is. At the very minimum, you're going to be offered a preferential ballot, and at the most you can get a form of proportional representation, assuming that we can get some agreement across the country.
Yeah, and thank you very much for the invite. I appreciate having the opportunity to meet with you people. My name is Glenn Sollett, and I am your candidate for Courtenay, Alberni, for the Green Party in the upcoming election in 2015. The party's position is very pro-proportional representation. The biannual convention was held this year, in which members came from all around the country and voted on the resolutions that will largely not make up the Green Party platform. The Green Party always has a platform. It's on the website every day of the year and is nuanced every 2 years through a convention. So the resolution with regards to proportional representation passed in a landslide. The Green Party is extremely supportive of proportional representation. Not one specific model, though. It hasn't said it must be MMP or STV. What it said is it needs to be evaluated. We need proportional representation. Let's make sure that 40% popular vote is reflected by 40% representation in the room. How we get there, let's decide. But it's incredibly important that we do that. I don't believe MPs should be whipped. I think that there's I think that the parties must work together. And we don't see that now. There's too much partisanship. Parties just fighting amongst each other. What I think is important are the ideas, not whose ideas they are. So we have to figure out a way for the parties to work together. So that's my position, the party's position, and the leader's position. We are pro-proportional representation. Thank you.
I will note, we did invite the Conservative Party to come visit, but unfortunately we received no response.
What provision does it provide for anyone who wants to run as an independent? And how would those be dealt with?
For independents in multi-member districts, STV, particularly, they get elected. They can get elected any time. Someone who's popular, not in a party, they'll be elected. In Scotland and Ireland, independents are elected. It's a regular feature of STV. It's a regular feature of STV also that candidates from the same party have to run against each other. If a party thinks they'll win two seats, they may put up 3 candidates because maybe they'll do really well in that election and they'll be able to elect 3. So they'll put up an extra one. The voters get to pick which of those 3 they want to support. And if the guy's been a real, whatever, they don't have to vote for that person. But right now, if it's a one-member candidate and it's your party, you got to vote for the person, even though they've been, not doing what you want them to do. So with multi-members and multiple candidates from the same party, you can pick and choose. And you can pick and choose about topic as well. So you may pick an education candidates from different parties, or the person who's most in favor of resource development from different parties, and make your vote count the way that you want it to count with a preferential ballot and a multi-member district.
He was asking about independents who aren't running for a party.
Independents would be completely electable. They'd be very electable, independents.
I think I can cite one stat from memory, and that was at one point Ireland had something like 8% independents in their parliament. So in the Canadian context, that would be like having 25 independents elected to the House of Commons, which of course that's unthinkable under our current system. It's probably worth noting that post-World War II, Germany has been using MMP. That must be getting on to 70 years now almost that they've been using that system, predating the popular use of computers by a long shot. And Ireland has been using STV for over 100 years. So if a poor Irish person from over 100 years ago could figure out how to use the voting system, one would think that we can kind of catch up today. So.
I seem to remember that New Zealand spent a great deal of time and money educating people before they actually had the referendum, so people really knew what it was about. And what happened here seems there was some awareness in people, and we did it was amazing. We almost reached that 60% threshold. But then it was so easy for naysayers to get in and confuse things by saying, oh, it's going to result in minority governments and we'll never get anything done and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people, like he said, my friends included, said, oh, what the hell? I just can't go there. So I think education is a crucial piece, and my question is, did you guys have a budget as part of that commission to do that? Was there any discussion afterwards about more budget?
The Assembly was treated like a standard commission where at the end of it you have a report, it sits on a shelf and no one does anything with it. And I had an opportunity during to talk to Gordon Gibson, who designed the process for the Assembly, and I said, you know what, we went out, we had all these public meetings, we had 50 public meetings around this province, we went and asked people what did they want in their voting system, what did they think should be done, and not one bit of money came back to us to go back out afterwards and tell people. So we had no money, no support. They had a referendum information office, and in that first referendum, the person in charge of that was pretty good. She tried to come up with lots of ideas to get the word out, and she would not get the funds for it, not get the support to do it. It's hard for us to explain why changing the voting system is good. And we didn't have the money and the market, the money to really do a good job marketing that.
In the second referendum, there were 2 groups, proponent yes and no sides. The yes side was all amateurs, we had no idea what we were doing. And the no side were professional communication media people who didn't have to tell the truth and who could build fear. And they did that whole thing. We know who those people are and what they did, and they've done it several times on different topics. And so how do you battle in the last few days before the referendum, advertising which comes out, which is completely false and just loopy. We couldn't win with that.
We're here today. I mean, the banner says it. We're here because we care about democracy. I care about democracy deeply. Democracy is in decline. We see voter turnout declining. We see apathy increasing. We see all those barometers of the health of our democracy going down. Increasingly, we're a nonpartisan, multi-partisan organization. But we do have a lot of current examples in Ottawa of our democracy under threat, and that also concerns me. But what we need to know, and what we've heard from people here today and those that are seeking office, is democracy is not totally dead. So our voices matter. Us as a local action team, we intend to get out and get some more tables out, get information out. Those of you that might want to join us, we have a sign-up sheet at the back. So if you're interested to be more involved, we have a column on there where you can indicate we have a regular meeting group, so you can elect to sort of be more involved. That's more emails, or you can opt to be a supporter, where when we hold events like this, we'll try and ask for your help. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say. So thanks again for everyone for coming out.
So you have to be involved, you have to pay attention, and you have to hold them to account. And that will happen much better in a proportional representation system than it is now. Right now they can promise what they want, or they don't even promise. They just do it. They just do what they want. And it's unfortunate that that's what we have right now. When you've got to choose more directly, you'll get an MLA or you'll get an MP that truly does represent you. And if those are issues that are big enough and we have enough people talking about those issues, they will then become representative in our democracy or in our parliament.